Good afternoon and good morning to those on the West Coast. This is the SD Times webinar from Death to Manual Deployments, hosted by Eric Minnick, Senior Offering Manager and DevOps Evangelist at the IBM Cloud. Eric is a product management lead with IBM, where he helps shape the future of IBM's continuous delivery products. Eric joined IBM through its UrbanCode acquisition. A 10-year veteran of the continuous delivery industry, he works with customers and industry leaders to find the best ways of adopting continuous delivery and DevOps. He is a frequent speaker and writer on continuous delivery and DevOps topics. Prior to product management, Eric was a developer and consultant and has contributed to multiple generations of UrbanCode products. So without further ado, I will now hand it over to Eric.
All right, thanks, Alex. This is always a topic I love talking about, and I'm really passionate about it because, gosh, I hate manual deployments, and I think we can do a lot better with automation. And so what I think a lot of people are going to take away today is, I imagine a lot of you already want to get rid of manual deployments. And hopefully this presentation will help you structure your own conversations with your teammates and your management around it. For those of you who are on the fence, I sure hope I convince you. But let's get into it. We want to get rid of manual deployments before they get rid of us, right? When we look at what's happened, over the last few years, we've seen a series of just catastrophic articles, right? In the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, you name it. There's been an outage and it's hit the paper, right? This is what we don't want as engineers, right? There's no good press for engineers. There's only bad press. There's, Knight Capital had a trading glitch that cost it $440 million. And in the SEC report, did not have technology governance controls sufficient to ensure the orderly deployment of new code. They were doing a release. It went squirrely. As a result, their trading platform started trading against itself and wiped out like half the market cap of the company in 45 minutes. This is not what we want to have happen, right? We see, website crashed on Black Friday. We couldn't book passengers on our airline because the website was down and they all went to the competing airline. This happens across the board, and as we release software more frequently, which we do as we transition to Agile, we just can't have this happen, right? We need it to be safe. But we also need to be agile. We're competing on software. We're trying to go faster and faster and faster, and we need to be able to do that too. So this is really the game. So as Alex said, I'm Eric. I've been doing this a while. I've co-written books on application release and deploy for dummies. I always appreciate it when people follow me on Twitter. You have me at Eric Minnick. If you need to email me questions, you've got it. So, and Joe's being helpful and pushing out in the chat my contact. So, aside from the scary threats, right, that you're going to put your company out of business with the manual deployment, what's so bad about them? Why do I hate them so much? They're slow, right? They're inconsistent. We end up failing in production, and the audit trail's weak. I guess other than that stuff, they're fine, right? It's not a very good endorsement of any sort of process of slow, error-prone, inconsistent, and weak in audit. But you will find in any organization someone who will defend manual deployments. And when they do, they tend to speak with a lot of I words, right? I feel like I'm in more control. It's how I've always done it. I know what happened. I can see it. My hands are on it. I can fix this thing if anything goes wrong. And that's going to keep us safe. I feel comfortable that way. Right? This is how people tend to talk when they're defending it. And I think there's this kind of sense of, for an operator, hands-on keyboard, right? This kind assurance that you can see the stuff scrolling in front of you, that you were the one who typed it in. But the rest of the organization, who just hopes that Bob is doing the deployment right, they're going to be a lot less comfortable, right? Because of the issues that crop up. And then there's going to be someone who will say, well, I'm not really manual. I've got a bunch of scripts. Okay. Does that mean I'm automated? And I always ask these sorts of questions. How many scripts do you run? How do you know what order to run them in? How do you get them to the right machines? How do you update them and get them to the right machines? How many people are running the scripts? Those sorts of questions. Who's allowed to do it? And so the scripts help, right? You might go from having a workbook in Microsoft Word that says, well, go type in these 30 things on each of these 60 machines, to go type in these 3 things on these 60 machines. And 3 is a lot better than 30. But it's not quite where we want to be, where we're hitting a button and all the 60 machines are updated. So scripts are part of what we're shooting for, but they don't count. And we need to really acknowledge that, that they're a partial solution. So this really gets to what do I like about automated deployments, and then we're going to really zero in on what we need for real automation and not just a couple of scripts. All right, we want to be fast, consistent, dependable, high quality on the deployment, with an audit trail that is just there, all right, that's automated, and everybody knows exactly what happened. If anything goes wrong, we know where it went wrong, what the errors were, and we can jump on it right away. All right. And once we have this sort of automation, right, we're going to be able to build on this, right? We're going to be able to move on to continuous deployment and attaching smoke tests and blue-green deployments and things like that. And we're going to empower people, right? We're going to be able to go from a situation where a QA lead has to ask someone else to do a deployment and wait for them to be done, to the QA lead can just press a button and it happens. At the same time, we don't have to worry about the QA lead going onto the box and mucking around to do it themselves and doing it wrong, right? So we're really driving for more speed, less effort expended, less cost, and higher quality. If we don't break the iron triangle of time, quality, cost, we failed here. We have every opportunity to break the iron triangle, and this is why automated deployments are so powerful and so popular right now, why everybody's thinking about it. So with that little 5-10 minute introduction, let's get into the core program here. We're going to look at manual deployments. What makes them so bad? Where are the weaknesses, right? Because it's not necessarily obvious. And from that, we're going to take the elements that we need in our automation. We're going to say, well, if manual was bad at thing X because of A, well, then automation should be good at X because of B, right? Then we're going to look at some trends and where this is going and how people are shaping it. Team to team through emails or file shares. All right, if you're taking the bits and you're dumping them in a file share and then you're emailing someone and saying, hey, can you please deploy the latest that's in the bucket? Yeah, it's a manual process here. And that's slow because you got to wait for the other person to read their email and then take action. You're going to have inconsistency because I guarantee the person who's doing that work in dev test, in QA, and production, different. And that inconsistency will lead to failures, all right? And your audit trail's then in email more often than not. So that's pretty weak. That's going to be hard to find and run down. Now, you also might have a manual deployment if dev, QA, and ops do things differently, right? And this we see all the time, where an ops team takes some traditional runbook automation tool and kind of scripts a deployment in that. The dev team takes their continuous integration tool and scripts a deployment in that. QA, I don't know, maybe they use what dev has, maybe they do it by hand. They get abandoned as usual. And we just get this inconsistency, right? Where everybody's doing it differently. And because of that, the software might be the same in dev, test, and production, but it's not installed the same way. It's not really running the same way. Things get skipped all the time. And you end up with these big arguments about, well, you didn't tell me there was a change to the process, and therefore it failed, so this is your fault. No, you should have been on top of it. That's just ugly. And this leads to like the worst pattern, and one that I've seen everybody admit to seeing, right? And this is being tweaks to process changes or configuration are communicated as broken, right? Where you have this situation where, development adds a data source or a message queue or starts calling some third-party web service, and maybe they have to update their middleware configuration, something like that, open a firewall port, some sort of configuration tweak. And so, they deploy the dev test, it fails, they do the tweak, it works, and a week later they throw it over the wall to QA and it fails. And then QA files a bug. And after arguing about how it works in dev for a while, some developer sheepishly goes, oh yeah, you need to open the firewall port. Sorry about that. And then what happens when we go to staging? Same thing, right? Someone sheepishly raises their hand. Now, hopefully there's a release manager close enough to the staging environment who catches that this happened and updates the release document before you go to production. And if they do, production doesn't fail. And if they miss it once, you blow up production until somebody scrambles, calls the developer's cell phone in the middle of the night, and we decide, oh, right, we need to open the firewall port. We're going to need to get the firewall guys involved. And a couple hours later, get it fixed. Good times, lots of fun. Right? When this happens, everybody should be really angry. The system is broken. Right? And we start dealing with this with documents, right? Oh, we need to document the procedure for doing the install. And the production support team has to review the document. And development needs to sign off on the document. And does anyone really believe the document is truth? Well, not really, because the guy actually doing the installation knows there's a couple of steps now in the document that it just does. It just gives us something to argue over and decide who was at fault the next time we fail. But, again, we're slow, we're inconsistent, because if you have some big, long installation document, I guarantee you there is zero chance that development is following that procedure in dev test. They're just moving too fast. They're going to script it in some way or hack it in some way, right? So we're again inconsistent, which will lead to failure. If the first time we're doing a deployment the production way is in production, then it's not tested, right? And when we don't test things, they break sometimes. Totally expected. We shouldn't be surprised. We're going to act surprised, but we shouldn't be surprised. And then, we start hearing terms like deployment weekend, right? We start failing a lot. So we pick some time that we think is less bad to do the release. Maybe it's on the weekend. Maybe it's Tuesday nights at midnight. But we're saying, okay, well, the release is slow and scary, and so we're going to do this at some obnoxious time. Okay. And so our poor ops people, the release team, whoever else is on call, they don't see their kids, right? And as we release more and more often, this becomes a bigger and bigger deal. I talked to a release manager a while ago, said, yeah, deployment weekend's no big deal when we release to production twice a year. Now we do it so often that in the last 6 weeks, I missed 2 birthday parties for family members and a 50th wedding anniversary for my parents. We need to change. Absolutely. And then we end up in this situation where developers would end up with production passwords. And this is always fun. You get developers and ops people in a room and you say, do developers have production passwords? And developers kind of look at the ceiling and the ops people say, no, could never happen. We'd fail audit. And then you ask the ops people to leave and then you ask the developers and they're like, yeah, of course we do. And how this happens is really dependable, right? You're doing one of these late night releases, weekend releases, things are going wrong, it's breaking, someone says, well, let's get the senior developer in here to take a look. Someone tosses them a production password and, you know, they fix it. And it's 3 in the morning and everyone just goes home and no one changes all the passwords. That'll happen in, you know, 90 days on the routine cycling. But, you know, a developer could do whatever they wanted in the next couple months. It happens all the time. And so one of these days, the developer is going to see a problem out there and they're just going to go in and fix it, right? Totally outside of all the controls, without a change request, without all of that. This happens. Developers are problem solvers. They solve problems regardless of policy. Just happen. So this is kind of scary. This is what we really want to avoid. Now, there's always somebody at this point in the presentation who's like, well, it doesn't have to be this way, Eric. There's nothing inherently wrong with manual deployment processes. If only we were more disciplined, we could do this. I thought we hired grown-ups. Our documentation could be fine, people could follow it, and we can record what we do in an audit spreadsheet, in our service management tool, wherever we do it. This isn't hard. Right? The documentation says exactly what to do, or at least it should. It wouldn't be hard to make it say that, to put in the order, to follow the instructions, to record what we've done. Right? We're grown-ups. So why isn't this true? Why isn't be more disciplined really the answer? Well, because people are really, really terrible at following instructions and being consistent. All right, I think there's a Jim Highsmith quote, something like, you know, people can do similar things over and over again, but never the same thing. Alistair Coburn, in one of the great papers in computer science, right, which kind of looks at the role of people in software delivery. Kind of looks at it and says, well, people are good at problem solving. They're good at being creative. Pretty darn bad at being consistent. We want to leverage what people are good at. Creating things, solving problems, reacting when things are interesting. And anything that's rote, anything that is follow a series of instructions the same way every time, and don't check your email in the middle, that's where we want to leverage machines. That's where computers are extraordinarily powerful, right? They're good at that. We're bad at it. If we try to compete with machines at what they're good at and we're bad at, it's going to be ugly. It's going to be lose $440 million in 45 minutes ugly, right? People are not machines. When we ask them to be machines, they're going to do a bad job at it, and it dehumanizes them, and it's not something we should do to our colleagues or ourselves. It's not good. So let's say we want to do it with a robot. We want to do it with a computer. How are we going to go about it? What are the big elements of an automated solution? I want to say again, there's 6. Right? We need to automate some stuff. We need to coordinate some stuff. We need to keep track of environments. We need to have an artifact repo. we need to have good access control, and we need audit. Let's look at those in a little more depth. So an automated process, right? So I think we see things like Word documents and spreadsheets defining releases, right? Remember our huge document? This is something many people have, right? The written run book. And remember our idea of scripts, and scripts are helpful. They get us part of the way there. Well, we kind of want the one script, right? Behind a button that we press. You press one button, all the stuff that pushes your application into an environment happens, right? So, I mean, this is part of the workflow editor for my UrbanCode deploy product. And you can imagine behind each of these little boxes is a little bit of automation, right? Maybe it's a script. Maybe it's some code somebody wrote. But we capture what was in the Excel spreadsheet, what was in the Word doc, we put it behind a single button that has to be pressed once, and it goes. That's really the goal. And if we can do that, it's going to be fast, it's going to be consistent, it's going to be repeatable, because machines are really consistent. It's going to be fast because if you're like me, if I kicked off a script and it took, oh, I don't know, 2 minutes to run, I am not going to actually watch that thing run for 2 minutes, and at 2 minutes and 2 seconds, run the next step. And this might be my irresponsible developer heritage coming through. I'd be like checking email, I'd be seeing the score of the game, I'd be distracted in a hurry. I might be on Facebook. Probably not Facebook. And yeah, 5 minutes later, I might realize I need to go run that next thing. I'd figure out where I was in my workbook, and I'd go run that thing. And because of this kind of lag, right, we hear over and over again that the time it takes when automated compared to when it was mostly manual with a few scripts, like 95% faster doing the same work. It's crazy. But we need this automation, right? The one button we press and the thing happens. And the thing needs to coordinate across multiple tiers or components. We need to model the whole system, right? Because for most of us, we have like system integration testing, right? That's a phase in our release cycle. And we do that because when a user comes in through the front end of our application and clicks on something or tries to buy something, a whole bunch of stuff gets hit, right? Think about, I think most of us now have mobile deposit, right, in our checking accounts. You can take a picture of a check, take both sides of the check, hit submit, and your bank credits you for it, and you can just trash that thing after a couple of days. Right? You don't have to take it to a bank. What's happening there? Well, there's a mobile app that's probably sending an image back to some distributed web servers back at the bank that are doing recognition, OCR work, to figure out like who you are, what does it say on the check, what account is it coming from, etc. It'll bounce that back to you to confirm. You'll say yes. And then it'll call back to some other back-end systems, probably more distributed servers that eventually will hit a mainframe to actually do a transaction. And so if you're making a big change to the mobile deposit thing, you're probably touching the mobile app, you're probably touching a couple of web services, you might even be touching the mainframe. And all of that stuff gets tested together and gets released together. Right? We have release managers to keep track of that. And so we need to have this view of the full application and release that as a group. Right? So when we say one button, we need one button to deploy this big thing, not to deploy a web service. Deploying a web service, that's trivial. Deploying all of this stuff and knowing that you've done the database changes, the schema updates, and sync with the web stuff and sync with the push on the mobile app, it's a little more interesting. And so we look at this through a lens we call snapshots, right? And the reason we do this is if you think about one of these complex systems, and we imagine each of these boxes being, a component like a web service, a database on the back end, a mainframe thing, a mobile app, right? What's really tempting to do is say, yeah, new version of the web service is good, move it over to QA. New version of this, new version of that, and we move these things over piecemeal. And then, it's like, well, what are we going to ship to prod? It's like, well, most of these things are good to go. That one web service isn't, so we're going to hold it back. And, we talk about it and we negotiate, and then we start throwing it all over at prod. But doing this piece by piece introduces some risk that we're going to get it wrong. And it happens all the time. And you end up with breakage in prod. Maybe you didn't move something that was needed to be moved. Maybe you took a wrong version of something. It's tricky. Maybe you did them in the wrong order. So what we really look for is this idea of a release set, a release version, a snapshot, where things happen the same way in dev test, right? New build in our continuous integration tool, automatically throw it into the test environment, run some quick functional tests. And that piece by piece thing in the lowest environments makes sense. At some point, you start doing some functional testing where you hit multiple services. And at that point, you want to give a name to all of the interrelated stuff that you just tested together. That's where the snapshot comes in. You say, yep, this is one unit of work. And as I release out to my later test environments and production, I logically want to move that whole collection of things. Now, some things don't change. Maybe behind the scenes, we don't actually redeploy them. But logically, this is how we want to go about it. All right. Now, environments, right? Environments are a tricky thing. And I think we are in a time in our industry where kind of the definition of environment is kind of changing. But fundamentally, we want to use that same deployment process that in dev test and in production. We don't want to redefine the deployment process over and over again. We want one process. But we know that the production password for our database is different than the password in dev test. At least we sure hope that's the case for everybody. And there's going to be other elements, right? There's going to be, is there a load balancer here? Are there 20 servers or are there 2 servers? There's going to be a bunch of variables that come into play. What we really want to do is take all the environmental stuff out, abstracted away from the generic deploy process, and say, okay, what I'm going to do for my real deployment is I'm going to combine my generic deployment process with the specific things being deployed this time with the specifics of the environment. And that's going to be my kind of runtime deployment process for this deployment. So we need to abstract out all the environments, know their orders, know their per environment configuration, potentially even per target configuration, abstract that out. And because we're talking about passwords, it's got to be all nice and secure. All right. Now I mentioned deploying, knowing what we're deploying this time. Right? That should be coming from a controlled place. We ran a survey a few years ago asking, hey, where's the stuff come from? Right, that you're releasing. And some people actually admitted, well, we email the files around. About a quarter said they had a proper artifact repository, maybe a Maven repo or a NuGet repo or something dedicated. A little more than half say, yeah, I've got a source control system. We store the files in there. And source control systems tend to be optimized for small text files, not large binary files, but that can work. A third have just file shares they dump stuff out on. Some go to the previous deployment environment, pick up the bits and push it. Some have it in the build server, which kind of acting as an artifact repo. And so key thing here is the number is greater than 100%. So most people had multiple sources. Very few of them were really optimized for dealing with binaries. it makes sense to put yourself in that second category. You know, a place where you can say, this is the file. I can show that this file that I'm putting in production is exactly the same file that I deployed to QA, and no one has tampered with it in between, right? That we have one source of truth for this. You want to have that level of traceability and visibility. You might get it from a source control system, but it'll be suboptimal. You want a proper artifact repo. We include one in our build and deploy tools, but we're going to integrate with artifact repos and source repos to support this. But you got to get rid of file shares, right? The thing that the TFS has done where it just dumps builds on a file share and we hope it's secure, like you got to avoid that. The magic Dropbox thing, we got to get out of the magic Dropbox and have a proper secured repo. And proper secured all the way through, right? We want to have a consistent deployment process we run in dev test and in production. We want developers to press the button, and we want production support people to press the button, but we don't want developers to press the button for production. In a way that's really simple, but we need to be able to attach role-based security and an audit trail to these environments, to these projects, to the applications. This ends up getting really deep really fast. But fundamentally, we want to get away from the situation where we say, well, the person who can do a deployment is the person who can log into the box's root. We want fewer people able to log into the box with high levels of permissions. We want, to say, whoever logically owns the environment, they can press the button. Doesn't mean they can log into the box. That's a good thing. It allows us to do things like let our offshore QA team deploy to QA. If the version we dropped for them was bad, let them put an old version back in. Can they log into the box? No. This gets to an audit trail, right? We need to know who changed the process. We need to know who ran a deployment, who approved a deployment, what version of the process was used, right? I like to say we want to win a clue. Who did it? How did they do it? Where did they do it, right? We need to have all that visibility at our fingertips. That should be really obvious and an advantage of automation. It's really easy for computers to record what they did. People tend to say, yeah, I ran the runbook that was in the Word doc. Do we know that that's actually what they did? Not really, all right? But a machine can record exactly what it did on every machine and the output for it, store it for you, make it really obvious, really easy. So let's say we put these kind of 6 components together, the automation, the environments, the security. What do we get out of this? Well, QA can take new builds faster, right? They don't have to wait for someone to install it for them. And it's installed into their environment correctly. So you get less defect argument between dev and QA based on things that were installed wrong. Hooray, we're more productive, right? Dev can automatically deploy into their test environments to get really rapid feedback on the code that they're changing. And things actually work in production, which is a nice win. And our audit trail is consistent. It's the same in dev test as it is in production. We have good separation of duties that's aligned to the business requirement, not aligned to who can log into a box. All right, so we had fewer people logging into boxes. Winning across the board. Higher quality, less work, more speed. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about some basic trends in the automation space. Because I've alluded a little bit to, hey, we want to deploy all this stuff together in the snapshot idea. But what kind of stuff do we include? So one of the surveys that we've run is saying, well, what's the scope of a traditional production and deploy effort? Are you deploying a build? Is it that one web service? Is it a business application with a few web services and some databases on the back end and a front end? Or is it 25 business applications that break each other. We found that about 12% said it was the one build, 44% said it was business application, 44% said bigger than a business application. And we've kind of lined up, I think as a market, and certainly as IBM, the sorts of tools we offer, products to those kind of three big scenarios. So basic continuous delivery pipeline tools, right, which we would provide, say, as part of our Bluemix platform as a service. That's going to handle I have a decoupled microservice, I want to push it forward independently. If you have a business application, that's where you're in the application release automation space, right? That's where our UrbanCode deploy product plays. And when you're dealing with multiple interrelated business applications, there are release management, release governance tools for that. It would then deployment automation tools. And that's where our UrbanCode release plays. And then we're seeing that all of the stuff, when we start looking at the one application, is getting beyond the web application, the web app, really, really quickly. Right? It's the mobile app. It's database schema. It's middleware configuration. All right. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I just saw a little flash in front of me saying you might have network issues. Hopefully one of my co-presenters will ping me and say it's all good, Eric. And then it could be the infrastructure itself, right? We're seeing people going deeper, right? Saying, you know what? Sometimes I change an application, it consumes more memory. So I need to update the virtual machines I'm deploying to take more memory. So I want to have that model as part of it. I want the underlying infrastructure. I want mainframe bits. So we're getting deeper and deeper and broader as we think about it. So when we're thinking about the infrastructure, right, now when we're talking about application delivery, right, we're modeling out, what are the networks that we're attaching to? We're modeling out, I want a Red Hat server, and I want, an auto scaling group around the database, and I want, right? We have to model it down at that lower level. So when we start looking at this, what's all the stuff? Yeah, it's web services, it's databases, but it's also compute network storage, right? It can be a full stack app really quickly. It can be a mobile app that we're pushing out to an app store. The more holistically you think about the problem, the better off you are. Most people will start saying, yep, I want to know the interrelated web services, and then I'm going to go to the database bits, and then I might reach to the backend transactional system or some mobile systems, and then I'm going to go deeper within the stack down to infrastructure and middleware config, things like that. Tends to be the order. When you're thinking about this, think about the full picture first and start doing some planning around that. But don't try to boil the ocean day one. All right, this is a good time to start submitting some Q&A questions. In summary, manual deployments are slow, broken, and horrible because they require people to act like machines in order to be successful. Machines are good at being machines. Let's use them for that. Anything that we test as part of system integration tests, anything that we do root cause analysis and breaks our app, that should be part of our collection of stuff. So if it gets tested together, we want to promote it together. It should be part of our automation. I mentioned a couple of IBM UrbanCode tools. UrbanCode Deploy had that environment provisioning, environment updating capability, as well as the application level deployment. UrbanCode Release helped us coordinate multiple business applications as they go out the door together, right? Do some scheduling, do some visibility back into all the development work done, etc. So we talked about, hey, here are the big things we need. I'll be honest, those are kind of the feature list for UrbanCode Deploy. No accident there. So there's automation, there's an artifact repository, scales, push button deployment with role-based security governing it, and some quality gates. Underlying cloud blueprint provisioning, so we can define the infrastructure. And it hooks beautifully in UrbanCode release, which will give us a view across the pipeline for multiple big business applications, right? Where is my big release at right now, right? So for people trying to do continuous delivery across many applications, or people who have big quarterly releases that they're trying to orchestrate, this is really, really powerful stuff. And you know what? What I love about this is it actually works, right? I started by saying, hey, we're gonna really hate on spending all weekend at the office, right? And you know, I see customers posting pictures of themselves kicking off deployments from their iPad, you know, as they're biking home from work or from the train, right? Because they're going home, and if they get a deployment request, you just push a button and it'll work, right? There's no fear. There's no staying late. It just works. And then you go do some math, and it saves everybody a lot of money, right? You know, we do 97% work or less work, or we're 95% faster, and development and QA are having a lot less arguments. We're spending a lot less effort doing rote work like doing a deployment or staying all weekend at the office to watch it work and be on call. And we're instead investing in our innovation, delivering for our clients, not gluing it back together when it all catches on fire at the end, but doing the fun stuff, changing people's lives, making money. So it works. Good stuff. I want to thank you all. Start shifting towards Q&A here again. Again, I'm Eric. You can follow me at Eric Minnick on Twitter. You have my email address if you have questions. If you want to learn more about UrbanCode, I'm sure Joe's dropping all of these links in the chat, which is great. Oh, and I didn't have a slide that actually said Q&A. All right. So with that, Alex, I imagine there's a couple of questions that have come in.
Absolutely. Please, folks, feel free to submit your questions. We have the questions bar here over on the side here, which I need to see here as well too, Shauna, if you can bring that up. There are, excellent, okay. Questions. Where do you start? Is there a type of application or project that you typically suggest as a starting point, assuming we don't just start automating hundreds of deployments to hundreds of applications?
Yeah, good question. So there's two ways of tackling this, like the profile of the application and its relationship to the business, and what kind of application it is. As far as the type of application, I think I mentioned usually starts with some web app, right? That you can then reach back to some data source or database in the back end. I'd say 80% of the time, people start with some web app. As far as kind of the meaning to the business, the danger is if you start with something too trivial, right? It's either too simple architecturally, or no one would really care if that app crashed. Then no one cares when you're successful, right? So what you're looking for is a somewhat complex application that the business cares about and gets updated a lot, right? Because that's where the pain's going to be. That's where, man, that was out for 2 hours last month, and some VP knows that, right? That's the thing you want to start automating, because you're going to find the best return on investment there. You're going to be high profile, you'll be well known, and when you do that, people are going to come clamoring, right? The specialty insurer Hiscox talked about this on stage at our conference, and they picked the DaVinci app, right? This big rewrite of something customer facing. And yeah, when that was completed, when that was successful, everyone came clamoring, how do I get on your platform, right? Help me out, help me automate too. And as a team that's trying to roll this out at scale, that's exactly what you want, because then you can start putting some conditions on, like, hey, you're gonna actually need some consistency or something if you want to be next. So that's where I'd say you start.
Okay. Another question here. Does this tool read manifests from artifacts to know the version, or is all that manually entered? How does it know what versions have been deployed?
Good question. So usually the knowing the name of the version is going to be done in the artifact repository. Now we do have our own artifact repository, and we get the name when something delivers a version in there. In an ideal case, it's the build system, right? The build system usually applies the version in, or in like a Maven situation, it reads it from a manifest and contains that. And then when it registers it with the repo, right, through a plugin or command line command, it'll give us that version number, right? And then we're just tracking that 1.06 alpha, whatever you named your thing, corresponds to that set of bits with that checksum. And I think you see something similar from other artifact repositories, and we'll just ask them, what versions do you have? Do you have any new versions for us to deploy? So it's usually the artifact repo that's going to be the API for the version number.
Okay.
And then the other identifier is just the collection of checksums off the files, right? SHA-256, MD5, something like that.
Okay, next question. Can you back up the UrbanCode configs?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're all sitting in a database. You back up the database as you normally would. If you really wanted to, you could export them into a JSON text format and store them as well. The tool itself will version all the configurations so that if you do make a change, you can very easily, compare before and after versions. Although it won't tell you what the old password was or the new password. That's a secret. It'll tell you changed it.
Okay. The next question is, can you talk about CodeStation, and is there a REST API available?
Sure. So CodeStation is what we call our artifact repository in UrbanCode Build and Deploy. You can share a single one. There is a REST API for interrogating the versions, pulling versions, posting new, as well as a command line utility for doing manipulation. So when we write a plugin for, say, something like Jenkins, so Jenkins can publish new versions over to UrbanCode, we use that same REST API. So we make sure to do REST APIs for everything. We don't cheat and do things behind the scenes with some other secret API. It's all public REST APIs to do anything with the tool.
Okay. Next question. Does UrbanCode deploy release work with IBM Curum, Oracle EBS, and CBEL?
Good questions. I don't know offhand is the short answer. Joe, you want to grab the plugins link and drop it in. So currently there are a little bit north of 150 different integrations for UrbanCode Deploy. So I suspect, have direct integrations with some of those. What we've also found as we look at a lot of the products put together from big vendors like Oracle and IBM is you look at how you actually do the upgrade, and it's like, oh, you're doing an MQ deployment under the covers, or you're deploying to WebLogic under the covers, right? Fiddling with some WebSphere thing. And those we would have direct integrations for. So we may have direct integrations, we may have those covered by kind of the underlying technology. And then if not, we've got 150 integrations because we integrate for a living. And Our customers also create new plugins. We made it very cheap to create an integration for everybody involved. So yeah, it's pretty easy to create them. But yeah, we're all ears.
All right, next question. Does your solution work for SAP on-premise and or cloud deployments?
I want to talk to whoever asked that question in more detail. So I'm going to go with a maybe, but I want to talk to you because we're doing some stuff around SAP. So I'll leave that there.
Okay, next question. How does it integrate with Jenkins?
Really simple. So we've got a plugin for Jenkins so that you end up with a post-build job. At the end of your build, it says, where's your UrbanCode deploy? That's kind of a shared config in Jenkins. What component or application is this installed as? Kind of where does it get it? What is this in UrbanCode land? And then at the end of your builds, if the build was successful or meets some criteria that you've got in place, that step kicks off, and whatever files you got out of your build get chucked over to UrbanCode deploy. It can automatically install them into the first environment, kick off your tests, send you an email when it's done. So real simple. A bunch of our clients use Jenkins.
Okay. The next question. I work in a mainframe environment, very traditional. I want to try and modernize my delivery of infrastructure maintenance. Can the topics you discussed here today be easily transitioned into a mainframe environment? The technology is easier than the social aspects. I think for a lot of mainframe teams, whatever's been kind of working for a while is comfortable, and it tends to stay there. That said, some parts of mainframe development are getting pulled to deliver much, much faster than they used to by changes going on closer to the front end. And I think those areas are really ripe for applying release automation, release management technology. And we've invested a good bit in the mainframe space over the last couple of years, adding a dedicated ZOS deployment agent, integration for kicks and other kind of mainframe technologies, DB2NZ, that kind of stuff. We're seeing clients with a lot of success as they start applying these same techniques, keeping track of, these are all the components that are changing. Here's my automation. There tend to be gotchas. Like a lot of mainframe shops don't want any of the mainframe binaries to leave the mainframe. Right? The idea of I want to store this thing in CodeStation is a little scary. So we had to create a CodeStation shard that lives out on the mainframe. Just so we can keep all the mainframe code there. So we're seeing people really successful at our Interconnect conference back in February. There were a bunch of different presentations on this. I believe State Farm was presenting on their success. So it's definitely doable, but you got to be very cognizant of the social change and explain why this has to happen and how we're going to be safer than we used to be. And kind of judge how gentle to be and how kind of mean to be. It's like, hey, this is too dangerous for us to do by hand anymore. We're making too many changes here. We need to streamline this and work on it that way. Okay. Next question. Is there a way in automated deployment to perform a rollback if any problem occurred?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. Because I think there's everyone's like, well, what about the rollback? Certainly the automation can be configured so that if anything goes wrong, you roll back everything that was done, right? For a web app, that's really trivial. You look up the previous version of the web app you had and you redeploy it. And, that's easy for an automation tool, right? We've turned that into a checkbox. If you've already updated your database schema, that can be a little bit trickier, right? Did you open that in a transaction that's still sitting open that you could cancel? Do you have database rollback scripts in place? Do you have going forward, going back pairs that you're delivering? Or are you calling back to your database backup and restoring it from some sort of a snapshot kind of idea? So there's gotchas as you look towards the non-atomic deployment things like databases. But fundamentally, the tool set supports it really well, can roll back a series of incremental changes, roll back to prior versions. All that capability is there, but you don't have to do it nearly as much because you're being consistent in how you're doing your deployment of a consistent set of code. And you've pushed it to a bunch of different environments the exact same way and tested the deployment process hundreds or thousands of times. The importance of rollback becomes much less kind of concrete. Tends to just work, or you do a little bit of fiddling and roll forward in reality. But this is something that I get off on a tangent on because I know we've invested huge amounts in kick-butt rollback capability, and then nobody ends up using it because the deployments just work. So good times.
Okay. Does UrbanCode support Docker?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Docker is fun, right? Everyone's looking at Docker these days. And to some degree, you could say, well, if I've got a Docker file, I just have to throw it at a host and I'm done, right? The installation is super trivial. And at the same time, we're often moving to Docker in conjunction with a move towards microservice architecture, where the number of things that we have in flight grows. And unless we are extremely good at decoupling them, and very few of us actually succeed in that, then we've got more things that need to be tested together, more things we need to orchestrate the deployment of, and the same general problems take place, right? Which Docker host am I placing on? How many versions do I have live? Right? So IBM has partnered up with Docker Inc., and we have some agreements with them, and we're also partnering up on the deployment automation some. So they've given us some pointers, and we've put a lot of effort into making sure UrbanCode Deploy does Docker stuff really well.
Okay, I think we've got about time for two more questions here, and I'm going to start with the first one of those two. This is fairly specific, nitty-gritty stuff. We use RTC for ZOS builds and deploy. We need better automation than what we get with RTC products. Would UrbanCode be overkill if it were only used for that purpose? Would it be a cost-effective solution?
Yeah, I think it should be. Now, probably most orgs also have a distributed side of the house, and you might as well try to bring those guys in. But yeah, in a straight Z, there's no reason why it wouldn't work. Yeah, talk to your sales guy.
Okay. Then this will be the final question, I believe. What skill sets are required for someone to set up UrbanCode for automating current deployment processes?
Good question. So you got to learn a tool, right? There's lots of documentation, there's YouTube videos, training, and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of coding to be done, right? So it's really just being able to look at your current deployment processes, understand how scripts are run or what commands are being run, and just translate that into the tool and decide, well, am I just going to take this script and run it, which is easy? Or do I say, well, there's already an integration that UrbanCode provides, and instead of continuing to maintain this script, I'm just going to use the integration instead. So it ends up being, the key skills end up being able to kind of read and comprehend these written runbooks reasonably well, having some level of familiarity with a couple of pieces of middleware so you can start translating concepts, and then the social elements of being able to engage with each of the application teams. And they're going to be the deep subject matter experts in their particular deploy process. But being able to kind of coach them into the automation ends up being as important as anything.
All right. Well, I believe that is it. Thank you so much for taking the time, Eric. That was some Herculean question answering there. So we thank everyone for showing up to this webinar, and please stay tuned for more information. The slides and this video will be distributed to you after the webinar is over, within at least a day, so you can run around and show this to everybody who needs to see it. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Alex Handy with SD Times, and please continue to keep an eye out. We have many more wonderful webinars coming up. Thanks again, Eric.
Thanks, Alex, and I hope to see some of you at the UrbanCode events that Joe just sent a link to. But thanks for hanging out with us for an hour. Really, truly appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.